Processors are nearly ubiquitous in our lives, from electronic door locks to TVs. Basically, any electronic product with some functions and home appliances have a processor unit that's driven by electricity. But were you aware that there exists a processor which, despite its age and lower power compared to today's technology, has been operational for over 50 years? It's not crafted by AMD, Intel, or Motorola. It may raise your curiosity about the existence of such a processor. Now, let's delve into the details of the Zilog Z80, a processor that can be considered one of the most significant CPUs to date. There are important details manufacturers don't tell you. The Zilog Z80, an 8-bit CPU, was released in July 1976. At that time, other processors like Intel's 8080 and 8085 and Motorola's 6800 were around. So why didn't the 6800 or 8080 dominate the market, but instead an unknown company? The answer is simple. The second advantage of the Z80 is its performance, which, in the early versions, could run from 4 MHz to 8 MHz directly. Intel's 8080, released in 1974, was 3 MHz, and Motorola's 6800 was only 2 MHz. Later versions of the Z80 reached up to 20 MHz with a more extensive instruction set compared to the 8080, making it faster. Currently, Z80's performance is roughly equivalent to a common STM32 F103, but performance alone isn't enough to maintain long-term use. What truly popularized the Z80 was the wave of home computers. In 1977, the somewhat rudimentary but then world-shattering Apple II was released using the MOS 6502 processor with a maximum clock speed of 1 MHz. This device featured a floppy disk system known as Apple DOS, included software, and offered a variety of options for expansion. In terms of today's technology landscape, it essentially functioned as a computer with a fully fledged hardware and software ecosystem. It was utilized in both domestic and professional environments and achieved sales of 500,000 units in just a short span, even with a starting price of $1,298. However, it's evident that such a computer was quite pricey for the typical family and served as a symbol of luxury for substantial corporations and the upper middle class. Not long after, a different model was introduced to the market. The ZX Spectrum, which truly ignited the personal computer revolution, isn't the first Z80-based commercial computer. The selling price was only £125, about $200. For less than the cost of an Apple II, it offered most of the functions, making it the starting point for many to learn about computers and programming. Being a later product, compared to the Apple II, it had larger memory, used a cheaper tape recorder, and had a higher CPU frequency than the 6502. Its processing technology and the Z80 made its low price a landmark in the development of affordable computers. This was a major victory for computers using the Z80 as the CPU. The X-Patron and several subsequent upgrade versions sold a total of 5 million units, 10 times the single-unit sales of the Apple II. In the wake of the Spectrum's success, there were two other noteworthy Z80-based computers that had a substantial impact on the evolution of personal computing, the MSX and the TRS-80. MSX was a standard created by Microsoft and hardware manufacturers. The TRS-80, released in 1971, was an affordable option with many configurations to choose from, but it wasn't enough to win here. The designs of Z80-based systems involved single-board computers with RAM, ROM, and comprehensive input-output circuitry, all integrated into a single PCB, permitting enthusiasts to either craft their own ROM programs or acquire widely used ROM chips from retail outlets. This felt similar to installing an operating system or buying a hard drive with a pre-installed system. In fact, by the time the ZX Patron was released in 1982, the Z80 had already become the go-to choice for single-board computers due to its excellent performance and plethora of tutorials. Numerous publications were dedicated to instructing enthusiasts on how to construct a Z80-based board from scratch, how to program it, run diagnostics, and utilize it in practical scenarios akin to the Content Computer periodicals featured in 2005. The deployment of Z80 single-board computers in both programming and educational environments had a profound influence on students and their families, particularly in countries like ours. In a few years, the world realized that a good product not only needed excellent performance, but also had to be accessible to everyone. You could see specifically designed Z80 computers, whether homemade or commercially produced, without redundancy. Of course, with the evolution of time and the rise of IBM PC architecture, a more powerful computer emerged, the microcomputer, which is what we commonly use as personal computers. Even though the PC Z80 was a pivotal player all through the 1980s, its predominance waned in the latter half of that era as the Intel 80286 started to take center stage. Even more scarce, the Intel 80286 emerged as a novel symbol of personal computing in the early 90s. The venerable Z80 was still utilized in industrial automation, PLC, and embedded applications with clock speeds of up to 20 MHz. But its connection with domestic computing steadily dissolved with the advent of newer graphical user interfaces and more intuitive personal computers. In 1990, the bigger news was Intel licensing the A251 core to multiple semiconductor manufacturers for their 8-bit microcontrollers. Prices for the B51 continued to fall, while efficiency and capabilities improved and more powerful 16-bit microcontrollers started to become more prevalent. The era of the Z80 seemed to conclude with its substitution by cost-effective, highly integrated and efficient microcontrollers in embedded systems and wider fields. Was this the closing chapter for the iconic chip? Not at all. The 90s were the era of explosive development for Japanese electronics. Among countless classic products, one stood out remarkably: Nintendo's Game Boy, released in 1989. The Game Boy astutely utilized a specialized Z80 chip, becoming the top-selling handheld gaming device. By 2003, it had sold 118.69 million units, with later iterations cumulatively exceeding 200 million units worldwide. The worldwide custom Z80 persisted in its role in the Game Boy line until the 2003 introduction of the Game Boy SP, which combined a dual 12-bit ARM7 processor with an 8-bit Z80 architecture. This inclusion of the Z80 in these later models guaranteed legacy support for original Game Boy and Game Boy Color titles, reflecting Nintendo's strategic foresight. Through Nintendo, the Z80 processor saw continued use into the early 21st century, maintaining impressive sales figures. Perhaps this marks its last upgrade until 2025, as it's still purchasable now and supports personal development. Many retro enthusiasts recreate Z80 computers with contemporary technology, such as self-project authors modernly redesigning a Z80 board with 256K ROM and 512K RAM, supporting external flash cards. It even employs FPGA for implementation. VGA video output and the Z80 MBC2 project bring traditional high-value performance using SD cards as disk, featuring a 128K 32A microcontroller also functioning as GPIO controller and EEPROM, supporting the CPM3 system. Helping you again. Though not in current use, its legend continues. A hero of the fire and iron half a century ago, now a timeless classic,